The amalgamation. In the following days, they went to collect the new apostles. First, they went to Matthew Levi, the tax collector. Matthew was expecting them. He had closed his accounts and prepared everything to transfer the business of his office to his brother. When they arrived at the toll house, Andrew brought Jesus to Matthew. Jesus looked at Matthew and said, "Follow me." And he got up and went with Jesus and the apostles to his house. Matthew told Jesus that he had prepared a feast for that evening, at least if Jesus approved and agreed to be the guest of honor. Jesus nodded in agreement. When they had eaten the midday meal at Matthew's, they went with Peter to meet Simon the Zealot. When Jesus saw Simon Zealots, he greeted the fiery patriot and said only, "Follow me." They all returned to Matthew's house, where they talked at length about politics and religion until the hour for the evening meal arrived. In those days, it was a custom that when such a banquet was laid before a distinguished person, all people from the surrounding area who were interested in the affair were allowed to freely stand next to the dining room in order to observe the guests and listen to the speeches. Consequently, most of the Pharisees from Capernaum were present on this occasion so that they could observe how Jesus would behave during this unusual social gathering. As the meal progressed, the joy of the disciples rose to great heights of mirth. Everyone was having such a wonderful time that the watching Pharisees began to criticize Jesus in their hearts for participating in such a light-hearted and carefree affair. Later in the evening, when speeches were being made, one of the more traditional Pharisees went so far as to make a comment to Peter about Jesus' behavior, saying, "How dare you teach that this man is righteous when he eats with tax collectors and sinners and lends himself to be present at such scenes of carefree fun?" Peter conveyed this criticism in a whisper to Jesus before the latter pronounced the parting blessing. As Jesus began to speak, he said, "As we are gathered here tonight to welcome Matthew and Simon to our company, I am pleased to see that you are cheerful and have a good mood among yourselves. But actually, we should rejoice even more because many of you will find entrance into the coming kingdom of the Spirit, where you will enjoy all good things even more abundantly. And to you who in your hearts criticize me for having come here to be merry with these friends, I would say, I have come with a message of joy and spiritual freedom to those who are morally unfree. Is it necessary to remind you that healthy people do not need a doctor, but those who are sick? I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Nevertheless, this was an unusual situation by Jewish standards. A man of righteous character who freely and joyfully went among the common people, yes, even among a group of unreligious, feasting tax collectors and alleged sinners. Simon Zealots also wanted to make a speech at this meeting, but Andrew, knowing that Jesus did not want the coming kingdom to be confused with the movement of the Zealots, persuaded him to refrain from making any public statements. Jesus and the apostles stayed in Matthew's house that night, and when the people went home, they had only one topic of conversation: the goodness and kindness of Jesus. The next morning, they sailed a boat across to Caesarea to pick up the next two apostles, the twin brothers James and Judas, the sons of Alphaeus. These two men were fishermen. They were expecting Jesus and his apostles, so they were waiting for them at the landing. James Zebedee introduced the master to the twins, and Jesus looked at them, saying, "Follow me." On this afternoon, which they spent together, Jesus gave them full instructions regarding attending festive gatherings, and at the end of it, he said, "All men are my brothers. My Father in heaven looks down on no creature of his making in contempt. The kingdom of heaven is open to all men and women. No one may slam the door of mercy when a starving soul wants to enter. We will sit with all who desire to hear about the kingdom. As the Father in heaven sees those below, all are equal. Therefore, do not refuse to break bread with a Pharisee or a sinner, with a Sadducee or a tax collector, with a Roman or a Jew, with a rich man or a poor man, with a free man or a slave. The door of the kingdom is wide open to all who desire to know the truth and find God. That evening, over a meal in the house of Alphaeus, the twin brothers were welcomed into the apostolic family. After enjoying a night's rest, the entire company, now 11 men, crossed by boat to Tarichaea. Thomas, the fisherman, and Judas, the vagabond, picked up Jesus and the apostles at the jetty of the fishing boats at Tarichaea, and Thomas took the company to his house. Philip now presented Thomas as his candidate for the apostleship, and Nathanael designated Judas Iscariot, the man from Judea, for the same honor. Jesus looked at Thomas and said, "Thomas, you lack faith, nevertheless, I accept you. Follow me." To Judas Iscariot, the Master spoke, "Judas, we are all of one flesh, and now that I receive you into our midst, I pray that you will always be faithful to your apostle brethren. Follow me." After they had refreshed themselves, Jesus taught the 12 about the nature and work of the Holy Spirit. But they failed to grasp the meaning of the wonderful truths he was trying to impart to them. One grasped this part, and another that, but no one could understand the whole of his teaching. Again and again, they made the mistake of trying to fit the new gospel of Jesus into their old forms of faith. It did not dawn on them that Jesus had come to proclaim a new gospel of salvation and a new way to find God. The next day, Jesus left his 12 apostles entirely to themselves. He wanted them to get to know one another. Jesus only returned for the evening meal, and in the hours that followed, he spoke to them about the nature of angels, a teaching that some of the apostles did understand. They rested that night and left the next day by boat for Capernaum. Zebedee and his wife Salome had moved in with their son David so that their large house could be made available to Jesus and his 12 apostles. Here, Jesus spent a quiet Sabbath with his chosen messengers. He carefully outlined the plans for proclaiming the kingdom and clearly explained the importance of avoiding any clash with worldly authority, saying, "If the worldly rulers need to be rebuked, leave that task to me. Take care not to condemn the emperor or his servants in public.